Graphic design history lesson, we're going to talk about Cubism, Futurism, and Dadaism, all of which were taking place right around the turn of the 20th century. And we're going to start with Cubism. You probably, or you may be familiar with Cubism, but more from the fine art world. It is an artistic movement that was created by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, and it employs geometric shapes and depictions of human and other forms. It was led by Picasso, and the Parisian painter Georges Braque, and the Cubist movement started in 1907. Cubism explores geometry and the redefinition of perspectives. It's really attempting to reveal objects simultaneously from different vantage points. It's as if they're exploding the objects in space. The work, such as that by Picasso and Braque, was very much influenced from their travels, and particularly art that came from Africa. So in addition to his travels, Picasso had recently been exposed to African tribal art at the Musée d'Ethnographie du Trocadero, also simply called the Musée du Trocadero, simply for some, which was the first anthropological museum in Paris. Here you can definitely see the influence of the work that he saw at this museum on his paintings on the left. Here's an additional comparison. We have this African tribal mask on the right, and then the painting by Picasso on the left. You can really see a heavy influence in the way that he's depicting their portraits. Now, at this time, prior to Cubism coming onto the scene, Impressionism was the rage, and it is all about light and color and capturing what we see in a fleeting moment. Contrary to that, Cubism is very analytical, and they try to portray what we know, not what we see. So Cubism takes things apart and shows a subject from varying viewpoints, whereas Impressionism is all soft and light, Cubism is hard and geometric. And let's look at the influence of the Cubist movement on graphic design. Around 1912, the Cubists invented collage. This is the art of pasting scraps of newsprint or wallpaper and other found elements onto their paintings and their drawings. We actually still use language in our creation today from collage when we do things like cut and paste when we're working in the various different software programs. Now, one of the artists from the Cubist movement is E. McKnight Kauffer. Designers from the Cubist movement is E. McKnight Kauffer. And Kauffer depicts the artist's palette in a Cubist manner in this poster on the right, as it is both a filled-in shape and an outline. Now, again, we can relate that to what we do now using the different software programs. We work with filled-in shapes and outlines. Now, he does the same thing with that open book. The lines are defining the corner of the book. They change from black to white, allowing the image to flow into one another and making them both transparent. And again, you can relate that to what we do using the various different software programs when we work with opacity. Even the typography in this poster is Cubist because it changes color and the baseline changes, implying a sense of depth. And you can compare it to this collage piece from Picasso and really see a similarity. And here in this poster on the right, Kauffer employs collage in his work. You can see that singular graphic element, that little red arrow that creates hierarchy and intent and definitely makes this a graphic design piece. Now in this poster, Kauffer takes things apart, and he plays with the shapes and the lines and the angles. He allows edges to dissolve, of the objects to dissolve, and he changes the shapes from a line to a plane. So again, you're hearing all the similarity to things that we do now in graphic design, and you can definitely understand the influence of the Cubist movement on graphic design. Even the angling of the type on the poster on the right gives it that Cubist view of space. Now, the French artist and designer A.M. Cassandra used Cubist ideas in many of his work. This is very evident when the type and the graphic shapes change color as they overlap and appear to shift in their perspective. In this design, Cassandra employs newspaper-like typography in a poster with the elements that overlap and interweave with a simple reversal of black to white. Watch those lines as they go diagonally across this design, and they shift from white to black. So it gives this exploded point of view and this goal of creating a sense or an illusion of depth. And currently, we still definitely see a lot of influence. As I was saying, it has affected our language and the way that we create work digitally. But we definitely continue to see a Cubist influence on the work of contemporary graphic designers. So you want to look for work that features multiple perspectives, hard geometric forms, and exaggerated or stylized features, and a flat or a monochromatic use of color. This is the work by a contemporary designer named Ricardo Guasco. I love the palette on the right. That is just so, the color palette is so beautiful. Now let's move on. We're gonna shift not the time frame, but we're gonna go to a different country. We're gonna talk about futurism. So we're gonna move over to Italy. We're gonna move from Paris to Italy. And because futurism was founded in Italy and was definitely influenced by Cubism. Now futurism glorified speed, technology, war, and Italian identity. And it was originated by this guy named Filippo Marinetti in 1909. He rejected the past and set out to celebrate a number of abstract concepts like speed, machinery, violence, youth, and industry. And he really wanted to distinguish the movement from Cubism, so the futurists sought to add an additional element to their work, and that was the element of time or motion. So in 1909, Marinetti published his Futurist Manifesto in a French newspaper because at this time, Paris was the epicenter of the art world. And it was in Paris that Picasso was revolutionizing art with Cubism. Marinetti wanted everyone to look at Italy, so he published his manifesto in that French newspaper to try to get more attention to his movement. And here are the ideas that Marinetti proclaimed in his manifesto. We intend to sing the love of danger, the habit of energy and fearlessness. We will destroy the museums, libraries, academies of every kind. We will fight moralism, feminism, every opportunist or utilitarian cowardice. Oh, it's hard for me even to read these. So here's the deal. Marinetti was a terrible writer and a somewhat terrible person, but he created some amazing typography that inspired generations of Italian architects, designers, and artists and created really a new graphic language. Futurists used typography to convey the sound of poetry, to convey the sound of events. And they really exaggerated and manipulated the type so it had this visual element of movement and visual element of sound or rhythm. One of the futurists was this gentleman called Giacomo Balla, and he depicted light, movement, and speed in his paintings and in his design. He was concerned with expressing movement in his work, but unlike the other leading futurists, he was not interested in machines or violence. And his work tended to be more witty and whimsical. It also made it a little hard to take him terribly seriously. That said, he did make some very beautiful paintings and some really great graphic design pieces, including the one on the right, where we see this incredible movement in this graphic element in that poster. Definitely depicts this idea of movement and speed, which is what futurism was very much about. Now, Fortunato Depero was another graphic designer in the futurist movement, and he founded the House of the Futurist Art in Rovereto. Here he specialized in producing toys and tapestries and furniture in the futurist style. But in 1928, he moved to New York City, where he had some pretty serious success. He did costume designs for stage productions, and he also did a lot of graphic design and advertisements, designing covers for different magazines, including The New Yorker and Vogue, among others. And he did this campaign for Campari. I absolutely love how he uses the positive-negative space in both of these designs, and both have an incredible amount of movement for being these still static posters. So fun. And in these examples of Depero's work, we're seeing some of the shared visual techniques from the Cubists, but with really a new depiction of depth and space. He's really trying to create this illusion of three-dimensionality and space in his designs. So now we're going to move to our third movement in this lecture, Dadaism. And I think it's probably my favorite because it is just so strange and fun. So Dadaism started in Switzerland, but it really expanded to Germany and France and Italy and the United States for sure, and beyond. It was an artistic and literary movement that began in Zurich, Switzerland, And it arose as a reaction to the World War I and this whole nationalism that they thought had led to the war. It was definitely influenced by other avant-garde movements, including Cubism, Futurism, and Expressionism. Now, the Dadaists embraced elements of popular culture and sought to upset middle-class social norms. It also embraced the absurd pageantry, and it tried to dismantle cultural values. I think that's why I like it. It really embraced absurdism. I think that's a word. And it was started by this guy named Tristan Tzara. He wrote the manifesto for the Dadas when he was 22 years old. He was actually a poet, and he wrote this manifesto when he was 22 years old. And he said every page should explode, either because of its staggering absurdity, the enthusiasm of its principles, or its typography. Here are some posters from the Dadaists. You can definitely see a similarity to the Futurists in their use of typography, but then you also have these really fun, absurd moments, such as that little fox included in there, or these little hands pointing. And even the letters themselves seem to be bouncing and dancing across the page. Here's some additional Dadaist posters. On the left by Kurt Schwitters, who's quite an important figure in the Dadaist movement, and then on the right by Tzara. So let's talk a little bit about Kurt Schwitters. He was one of those personalities whose inner structure was always Dada by nature. He still would have been Dada even if Dada had not called or had not been sounded. That's what Tzara said about Schwitters. And he created a movement within Dada called Merz. Now this is a nonsense word that comes from the word commerce. And he would do advertisement for all sorts of services. And the products that he would advertise were super mundane and ordinary. So this was very much keeping with the whole Merz philosophy and the philosophy of Dada, this absurd idea. And in 1923, Schwitters and Theo van Doesburg embarked on a tour of Holland. So they're taking their ideas on the road, the Dada campaign. And they sought to introduce local artists to Dada through a series of evening lectures and performances. It was called the Salon Dada, or the Dada Salon. So they would travel and they'd put on these shows and try to spread the idea of Dadaism to other countries. At each stop of these Dada campaigns, Theo van Doesburg sold pamphlets explaining what is Dada. They had these words scrawled around the periphery of a poster offering future possibilities, and it really read like an inside joke. Things like, every morning I slip on my Wellingtons, Bacavia. Dada is against the future. Dada is dead. Dada is idiotic. Long live Dada. Dada is not Howling Literacy School. Tristan Tzara. Dada has always existed. The Holy Virgin was already a Dadaist. So they were super silly and very absurd. And what I absolutely love is their playfulness with the type and then these graphic elements and the way that they position them on the page. Now also, Schwitters is probably best known for his handmade collages, in which he assembled bits of everyday material into layered compositions. He said, I didn't understand why materials such as tramway tickets, washed up bits of wood, cloakroom numbers, bits of string, wheel parts, buttons, and old junk from attics, and other garbage piles were not materials equally suited for painting as a factory-produced paint. So again, it's this embracing of absurd ideas and somewhat absurd at that time, practices. Now, Hannah Höch, oh my gosh, if I have to pick a favorite, is definitely Hannah Höch. I absolutely love her artwork. She's a German Dada artist, and she's very much best known for her collage work, and is one of the originators of the idea of the photo montage, which is working with photos to create a collage that is including pasting actual photographs or photographic reproductions, such as something that's pulled from the press or other widely produced media, and collaging them together to create these new compositions. Key themes in Höch's work were androgyny, political discourse, and shifting gender roles. I just think they are so fun and funny and sometimes a little bit sad. So to conclude, we talked about Cubism, which was heavily influenced by African art. We also talked about Cubist influence on graphic design with the explosion of space and also the use of collages, which really inspired our graphic language and the overlapping of space. We talked about Futurism, which was influenced heavily by Cubists, but they were also interested in exploded forms and they glorified speed, fascism, and war. Additionally, they used Cubist ideas to represent time and motion, and the Futurists employed language as sound. And then we talked about the Dadas. The Cubist influence was definitely apparent in the Dadaists, and unlike the Futurists, Dada artists hated war. They wanted to wake people up. Dada contained elements of absurdity, humor, and a challenge to nationalism, and albeit it was a short-lived movement, it spread significantly, specifically to New York and beyond. And to conclude, both the Futurists and the Dadaists used graphic design to promote their events and ideas. Their art practice often flowed into commercial work for clients, and their experiments with type and images really helped create the field of graphic design.